أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Welcome to this brand new show, The Struggle Within. A show, as I have mentioned in the previous weeks, a show that is based on the hadith that is related from the 6th Imam, who narrates that when the Prophet and his companions were returning back from battle and they were congratulating one another on having partaken in the minor jihad, the Prophet then said that prepare yourselves for the greater jihad. And when they asked the Prophet, what is this greater jihad that they should prepare for? He says it is the jihad of the nafs, the struggle within. It is on this basis that we have created this show, and I'm delighted to be joined by Shaykh Ali Hussein Datu. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for taking the time out. This week is going to be slightly different as we've had various introductory shows looking at what jihad is and the various prerequisites that are needed before embarking on this greater jihad. This week we want to look at a topic that is often underestimated. It's something that is ultimately needed when embarking on this journey, and that is lying. We're looking at various hadith, two that you will see on your screen at the moment. The first one that says, all evils have been locked in a room and its key is lying. And the second one, which is slightly more graphic, it says, when a believer utters a lie without a valid excuse, he is cursed by 70,000 angels. Such a stench emanates from his heart that it reaches the sky. And because of this single lie, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala writes for him a sin equivalent to that of committing 70 fornications. Such fornications that the least of which is fornication with one's mother. And there are various references of lying in the Quran. For example, Surah Nahl verse 105, it says, and they forge a lie who do not believe in the signs of Allah. Likewise we see again in Surah Zumar, it is mentioned verse 3, surely Allah does not guide him who is a liar and who is ungrateful. It seems that there are various hadith, various verses that talk about this, but ultimately when we were planning this show, one of the things that we looked at is the idea that lying is maybe not given the credence that it actually deserves. What are your thoughts on this topic specifically in that sense?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think there's many moral virtues that unfortunately due to the lifestyle that we live and the environment that we're in, and possibly due to the souls that we have today, a lot of these moral virtues are no longer given the importance that they're due simply because of man's desire to obtain something else. When we look at the moral virtues such as truthfulness, upholding the truth, speaking the truth, anybody will agree that it's something moral and has to be adhered to. It's a principle that would be at the cornerstone of humanity, and without it, things would not run in the correct manner, be it a community, a society, a government, whatever it may be. We find certain principles of morality are at cornerstones. One of them is speaking the truth. You find that when man's intention becomes polluted, and now when he's either envious of something, he's greedy for something, his desire overtakes this principle. And whereas his conscience will bite him initially, such that he shouldn't be attaining his desire by giving up his principle. It happens once, it happens twice. But the fear is that when somebody becomes habituated to it, silences their conscience and no longer feels when it bites them. Here I think it's quite important to understand that for somebody who doesn't have a religion and is simply a moral individual, he or she doesn't have any defined boundaries. They can shape and change their boundaries as and when they wish. For the first 10, 20 years of their life, speaking the truth might be one of these divine boundaries, or these boundaries that they've added to their own morality. But as they progress in life, they may see a lot of benefit in the temporal world and the temporary desires that they have. They might see a lot of benefit in obtaining them through lying. And so all of a sudden, this boundary changes from being the moral principle of speaking the truth to actually making lying from a vice to something which is a virtue. Whereas the one who has a divine religion, one who adheres to divine principles, they'll act within that boundary. And even if they step out of it, the boundary doesn't change. Their actions have changed, they have transgressed. But a virtue never becomes a vice, and a vice never becomes a virtue, simply because of the fact that these are divine principles which have been dictated by a greater power, or in our case, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
You say this, and I've had this thought various times in this show. The idea that a lot of these things, theoretically, they sound correct, right? But you mentioned the idea that we have these boundaries, especially having been brought up within the boundaries of this faith. I feel that these vices, or these various things that we've looked at in the weeks before, we see them in the community. We see that even lying, the way, maybe not seen as a virtue, but often, it's easy to utter a lie, even when we know it's wrong. But maybe to save ourselves, maybe to gain something. The fact that, it's a problem even within the community.
I feel it's not only a problem within, obviously, a Muslim community or a community that follows a divine scripture or religion, but it's a problem for mankind generally, simply because there's never enough emphasis on one's own soul and purification of one's own soul. We'll put a great deal of emphasis on attaining material wealth and value for ourselves and our children, and that's obviously something that's good and encouraged. But at the same time, we have to realize that there's something much greater, that there's something much greater than this physical body, which is the soul. If we put all that emphasis, the same kind of emphasis we put in the material world, on purifying our soul, on upholding our morals and principles, naturally we wouldn't find ourselves in the situation we find ourselves in, even within our communities, as you mentioned. If you look at a young child, you can actually see when they lie, or when they're trying to hide the truth, you see their facial expression change as well. You see that even physically they're affected by going against what they know to be truth. And you don't need to teach a child to say the truth. You have to teach them to lie. But the same child, as they grow through this environment, if they don't pay attention and heed to their soul and these principles, when they lie as an adult, you find that they can keep the same facial expression, gestures, as they would if they were lying. That tells you that something's corrupted in this adult, that when they were a child they would be affected by this conscious, and now all of a sudden it's very easy for them to lie and speak the truth and have no effect on their soul or their body.
Ultimately, it's almost a fitting analogy, the idea when you do lie, it's that struggle within, that you have to fight that temptation. But people will highlight and say that, listen, there are degrees of lies. It's one thing to lie where, someone else, or you cause someone loss, or, the idea that you lie and it doesn't really affect anyone. There has to be a difference, right? I mean, when we looked at that hadith, the idea that, you tell a lie and there's, it's as if you have committed 70 types of fornication, for example. I mean, that can't be for, say, a white lie, as they say, or a small lie, or a lie that doesn't really affect anyone else. I mean, what do you have to say about these various degrees of lying?
It's quite a cloudy area as to whether or not there's different intensities or degrees of lying. As a rule of thumb, I would say that a lie is a lie, and it's always going to be a sin, however you look at it, whether you term it as a white lie or a greater sin, a greater lie, it's always going to be a sin. Something like a white lie in today's terminology would be considered as a lie in which you're trying to give benefit to somebody. Somebody asks you about their appearance, and even though you feel they may not look good, you'll still tell them that they look good simply to appease them. However, we're not looking at the greater effect of this lie. It's not that nobody was affected, that the person thought they looked good and end of story, nobody else was affected. The fact that you're planting this seed within yourself, and that seed initially, like we said, it'll bite you and bite your conscience. but later on it grows, and they're linked to one another. It'll start off as what you and I may consider as a small sin, but as we become habituated to it, it can become a much greater sin, with a much greater impact on society and ourselves. Even if you look at traditions of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, they'll speak about the punishments of lies. When you attribute something, Sixth Imam has a hadith, when you attribute something to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, it will remove you from the upright religion. So you find that, okay, you might say that the punishment on this particular lie is much more intense than any other lie, but I don't think we can grade it and say this is greater or smaller. At the end of the day, each of them is planting a seed within you that might have a greater impact in the future, and the punishment we know is going to be severe either way.
When we look at a lie, and you mentioned a couple of these things in your introduction to the first question, but what is fundamentally the root of a lie? Is it more so the idea that we're trying to gain something, or are we trying to maybe inflate the way we come across, massaging one's ego, for example, the idea that maybe you've made a mistake and you will be looked at in a certain way, but then to try and protect that, you lie and you try and make it out to be something different? Or fundamentally, would you say there are various ways, or there are various routes to the fact that we would, stray from the truth in that sense? Or is there a specific route that we can, if we look at it trying to be practical, that we try and target that route, and we say that, okay, if we can work with this, then ultimately maybe we can tie up the other loose ends to figure out what is the cause of, straying from the truth, or being accustomed to lying in that sense.
I don't think you can pinpoint a root of lying, but I think you will see that anybody who lies, they lie due to the want to obtain a temporal benefit, be it ego, be it wealth, be it fame. Individuals lie to change the story, to try and change reality in order to obtain some sort of benefit. And this is where you find the tradition from Imam Ali alayhi salam, which is pretty much perfect. He speaks about how a believer would not lie even if it's to their benefit. They would prefer to say the truth even if it's to their detriment, rather than lie even though it might be to their benefit. Because of the vision that man has, that I might lie right now and I'll gain some sort of temporal benefit. One, that temporal benefit may not be halal for me. For example, if you lie in your trade, in business, and you obtain haram wealth, initially, yes, it's good wealth for you. You've accumulated more and amassed more wealth, but you'll feed your family with it. It'll have detrimental effects on your ibadah, on your soul. So the greater picture is at risk over here, not the temporal picture. What I find, if you want to look at why somebody lies, you'll probably come to the same result. That is because they want to obtain some sort of temporal, short-term benefit.
In my research, I came across certain quotes about lying, and this was from Sermon 84 from Nahj Balagha, where Imam Ali says, this is really worth noting, that he says, the most evil of speech is lying. And my initial thought was that, for him to say the most evil of speech is lying, even if, it is just some temporal benefit, because, when you look at the tongue, there are so many sins that come from the tongue. The idea of, backbiting or slander or, abuse, all forms of abuse. You can see how visible, for example, if, for example, someone is racist, you can see how visibly disgusting that is, right? But when they lie, for example, it could be, a temporal benefit, no one knows, and it's just done. But Imam Ali says that is the most evil, as opposed to those other forms. What are your thoughts on that?
The example you gave alludes to one of our previous conversations, in which we said that people are desensitizing this vice. That today, if you look at somebody and they're abusive and they're racist and they speak foul language, it hurts you, and it hurts the people around you, and society will jump upon them for the evil act that they're committing, which is rightly so. But why not for lying? because it's become such a norm. And how did it become a norm? It became a norm by individuals themselves not letting their conscience guide them correctly. In previous societies, in this country as well, previously, if you look back a few hundred years, you'll find that it was quite normal to speak in a racist, abusive language that we might hear one of two individuals still mentioning today. But at that time it was accepted. It still hurt people at that time. The individuals who were on the receiving end were still hurt, but there was nobody who was willing to listen to their own guilty conscience when they were speaking of such words. Now we find it's the flip side. You've got people, okay, when it comes to racism, people will stand up for it, but when it comes to other vices such as lying, individuals have become habituated to it. In this sermon that you spoke about, Imam Ali categorizes and mentions a few aspects of lying. First, he talks about jest, somebody who lies even whilst joking. And it's very interesting that it's only when you read such profound words that you realize that these individuals have to have been guided divinely. Even if you read other scriptures, even if you read other advice that comes from other saints, you don't find it to be so accurate. And you don't find that it's so intricate. That even when you're speaking in jest, when you're joking with one another, if you're trying to lead the person on, and they don't know it's a joke, you're not only affecting them by misguiding them, but again you're affecting yourself. And you are lying to your own intellect, whereas the intellect doesn't lie. The intellect will tell you 1 + 1 is 2, but you have to force your intellect to hide what's the truth in order for your tongue to come out with that which is the untruth, which is a lie. This struggle within, it's meant to be reversed. It's meant to be against the desires of the soul. Instead, we're trying to go against the intellect and the heart and ensure that we attain these desires. Imam also talks about breaking one's promise in the same beginning paragraph. Again, somebody lies. They make a promise knowing that they're not going to fulfill it, or later on they break their word and they've lied. When it comes to this comparison with other vices such as slandering or backbiting, if you look at slandering, it's tohma, it's accusing somebody, which means lying in and of itself. So again, the root has come back to lying. When you look at backbiting, it's actually speaking the truth. You're actually speaking the truth, but you're not protecting the dignity of a brother or a sister, or of another human being. So whereas the first one comes from lying, the second one doesn't necessarily come from lying. It comes from protecting somebody's dignity, but you're speaking the truth. We also have traditions that tell us that all sins are locked and the key for this sin is to lie, which shows us that lying is not just to be looked at in and of itself, but that it's connected to many other vices. One might start by lying, but then eventually he might go to slandering, to backbiting, to many other evil acts. And hence the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam and Allah Ta'ala in the Quran have come down so harshly on what may seem as such a trivial thing as lying.
You mentioned the idea that, when you start lying and you become habituated, and it can lead to other things like the hadith mentioned. What then are the effects of lying on one's soul? If we were to break it down, looking at it from, say, for example, a timeline kind of thing, if you start lying and become habituated, what would you expect to see within yourself? I mean, the verses previously that we mentioned was the idea that someone who lies doesn't have belief, ultimately. Can we look at that synonymously with the idea that, the effect that lying has on the soul?
Yeah, we can break it down to many different effects. Maybe if we broke it down to some major ones first, like you mentioned, was faith. That you can't taste the true faith, sincere faith, when you're willing to overlook principles that God has laid down. You can't have both, the dunya and the akhirah. You have to choose one. And if you're ready to fight and work for this dunya by giving up the principles of the akhirah, then naturally one won't attain any faith. One won't attain true faith. Because for true faith to be attained, you have to be a true servant and show true servitude. And that means giving up what you and I may desire in order to adhere to God's commands, even if we don't understand them in some circumstances. Secondly, I think it would definitely bring every individual to becoming an immoral person. And even in society, even in your own family structure, in your community, if you have an individual who's a habituated liar, you find that their companionship is not sought after, naturally. Nobody can trust this person from what they say. People will distance themselves from him. Aside from that, we have a hadith about the angels moving a great distance from this individual due to the stench that emanates from their soul. So you find that not only in the physical kingdom are there negative effects on this person, but also in the spiritual kingdom as well. Finally, I think it's obvious to say that one's soul will be corrupted. If one corrupts their soul, their eventual end cannot be good. And it's not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala won't forgive this individual. We know out of His mercy He's willing to forgive many great sins, the majority of great sins. But it's the fact that an individual who becomes habituated will struggle to want to change and want to be forgiven. Because they find that whenever they lie, they get benefit, temporal benefit, but they obtain it. Why would they give up that temporal benefit for something that they don't even believe in? Because if they truly believed in God, they wouldn't be doing this in the first place. So it's a great doubt on this individual's certainty in God itself, which comes back to the first point, that they lack in faith and won't be able to taste true faith if they lie as well.
We've had various shows in the past, and one of the shows was the idea of self-reflection. That ultimately it's necessary at some point, whether it's daily, weekly basis. However, the idea that we look within. If when we look within and we see that we have this trait, this idea that we can lie, that we slip almost, even sometimes we may feel the conscience, but ultimately that we do, and we find that we can and easily can, especially when, for example, we may have made a mistake, for example, and we try and cover our tracks almost, or try to seem that we're not at fault in some way or the other. So when we internally reflect, and if we see the fact that we have this trait within us, that we can lie, would it then be fair to say that, ultimately there's a lacking in faith? Can you draw that conclusion black and white? Would that be fair?
I don't think you can say the person lacks in faith in the sense that they are actively rejecting God or faith in God. But they definitely lack some sort of certainty and certitude in God. Because if they believed in His existence, and if they believed that the religion was the best path for them, then they wouldn't sway from it. But it's only because they either doubt His existence, or they take for granted His mercy, or they feel that this path isn't correct for them, that they feel that these boundaries are not divine and they won't get me to the best possible result. That's when they begin to go outside and commit such a sin. If they realize that the religion was the best path for them, then why would they need to go outside? Why would they need to transgress? It's only because they're searching for something which they haven't found. If only man realized that when he runs after the world, Allah has a beautiful hadith in which hadith al-Qudsi, He reveals unto the world, and He says, serve the one who runs away from you and tire the one who runs towards you. So the more we run towards any temporal benefit, He doesn't want to give it to us, because we'll never stop. We'll achieve some sort of temporal benefit. After a short while we won't be satisfied with it, we'll go to something else. But He wants us to realize that He's placed these conditions for a reason, to have absolute trust and certitude in Him as well. So in conclusion, they maybe not lack faith by opposing God openly, but they definitely lack some sort of trust and certitude in Him.
But it seems so easy. So easy to lie. It seems so fruitful almost sometimes. The idea that you tell a quick lie, you get yourself out of trouble, or you exaggerate something and you get that benefit. You're not necessarily harming anyone, and you don't even have a a bad intention as such. It just seems so, off the cuff. It just, hey, let's, it just goes. The idea that, obviously if you're going to lie and there's going to be some great detriment to another person, yes, the conscience does come in. But the idea that you become habituated in, just day-to-day, run-of-the-mill kind of activities where you can lie. It could be something within business. It could be anything. Just making any excuse. Someone makes plans you want to cancel. Sorry, I have to meet someone else. You don't have to meet anyone. But just to get yourself out, and it can become so easy because the benefit is instantaneous almost. When you lie and you see that you've attained your goal, however, whatever it is, so small it could be, and you deflect whatever it is you were trying to avoid, and you see that it worked, and ultimately you then become habituated, right?
You would become habituated, but it's like any sin. Right now, if somebody who's never drunk alcohol before, and somebody puts alcohol in front of them, they'll obviously repel it. They won't want to drink it or even go near it. But if they slip once and they drink it, it'll bite them. They'll slip twice, thrice. It'll keep going on until a time comes that they become so habituated to it. And they won't see it. They'll say, okay, I'm only affecting myself. If somebody's drinking alcohol, they'll affect themselves. They'll affect their physical personality. They might get drunk and lose their senses. But it's not affecting anyone else. They haven't harmed anyone else till now. But is it a risk worth taking if they're going to look at it in that manner, that till now I haven't affected anyone, it's just been affecting me? Number one. Number two, Islam hasn't come for an individual. The religion is for the entirety of mankind and to be enacted upon within a society, within a culture as well. So we have to look at the ramifications of these few words that you and I might say to the society, to the family, to the people around us. Can you imagine by one lie you can teach a child for the rest of his life that it's okay to lie? When a parent tells the child that, okay, tell the person on the phone, I'm not at home. With that one lie, he or she, the parent, has taught this child from here onwards that it's okay to lie to try and find some sort of temporal benefit. Now every time that child lies, you play a share in that sin as well. So what seemed something that was very small, in actual fact, like the butterfly effect, it seems like a small flap of a wing or a pat of a wing, but on the other side, the wind could collate and bring about something of great destruction. So I don't think we can look at it in that manner to say that for you and I it might have been something small. We have to look at it in a much more macro level.
Throughout this discussion, we've looked at lying on the basis of we ourselves lying, how we perceive it within ourselves, looking at the struggle within, looking at the idea that we have to restrain ourselves almost to look within and look at the fact that if we are able to lie, why are we lying? So to question ourselves in that sense. And to question, for example, if we are able to lie, do we have that sincerity as is mentioned in the hadith? But moving on from that, how is it that we perceive liars? Because we often, the fact that we can look within and we can also make excuses for ourselves as to why we lied. The fact that, okay, maybe I tried to protect someone, or the fact that, listen, I actually gained some benefit from this, and your mind looks at the benefit and not at the lie. So you kind of mask it, so it's not as bad. But when you see somebody lie, blatant, it's in your face, you've seen the truth, you witnessed or you were witness to their actions, and now they are lying. There's an almost instantaneous kind of, I don't think disgust is the right word, but the idea that you're repelled straight away from them. You have an image about that person. You've almost made or drawn some kind of conclusion about that person. Say, for example, you've never met this person before, but just within this scenario of meeting this person, you've witnessed them lying. It's almost as if you would have created an image of that person, and it's almost ingrained because it seems natural that we detest those that lie.
I agree with you, and firstly we should have this idea about ourselves, that if we lie, then we should detest whatever corruption is there within our soul that has brought us to lie. And then naturally the same will happen for others. But it would be very hypocritical of us if we were to find it disgusting for another individual to lie, but we did it ourselves in our daily life. Or what we might find as smaller lies, but we found this to be a greater, or as you mentioned, a blatant lie. So there can't be this hypocrisy, number one. Number two, you lose trust in a lie. And trust and reputation are some things that are very difficult to obtain. One of our madrasa teachers told us that it's like having water on your hand, on the palm of your hand. And as soon as it spills onto the ground, it's near impossible to bring it back. So if you trust somebody, you trust them with everything, with your life, with everything that would happen. If they believe that they could do something, you trust them. If they said something, you trust them. You don't think twice, you don't question them. But as soon as you lose that trust in them, they break their promise, they lie to you, you begin to doubt anything and everything that they say. No longer can you trust this individual. Imagine if that was to happen inside a family, that a brother can't trust a brother, a spouse can't trust the other spouse. You find that it breaks a family, it breaks a community, it breaks entire nations, and then you find evil spreading worldwide. Today you look at the oppression that takes place throughout the world. How many lies have been said to the rest of mankind in order for people to fulfill their desires, and the result has been oppression and evil and corruption in the world. Look at the divide between the poor and the rich. How many lies have been said in order to accumulate wealth for one group and amass it for one group and let them exploit the other. It all comes back to this one, what may seem, like we said before, a very small few words that are petty, but their ramifications are huge when you look at it on a macro level.
Is that ultimately, I mean, you touched on this, the idea that this habituated tendency, the knock-on effect on society, can you just expand on that? It can start so small, like we mentioned, but if everyone had that idea that, it's not that big, if everyone in the community, for example, had that tendency or had it within them to be able to bend the truth here and there, 5 years, 10 years down the line, or in a generation, what would you expect to see?
A corrupted society with individuals who do not pay heed to morality. Allah is clear in the Quran that He says, "Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin." Allah will not change the state of a people until they change themselves. He'll perfect the change. You try your best and He'll complete it. But there has to be the initiating step has to come from the people themselves. If a society is not worried about morality, if a society accepts liars into their society and accepts people lying to them and they lie to people as well, this society is not going to progress. Whether you look at it as a society, a community, a people, a family, a nation, it's not going to progress. It's not going to get closer to perfection, which should be their aim, simply because of the fact that they're willing to accept vices and people who are immoral into society. I've also found, and I'm sure you've seen when you travel around the world, you begin to notice this much clearly, that individuals try and split their lives between their work life and their family community life. In one side, they may not be quote unquote religious, and on the other side, with their family and community, they try and adhere to religion. When it comes to business, they lie quite easily to make their sale. And when it comes to society and community and family, all of a sudden, they don't want to lie. But it doesn't last for very long. A hypocrite cannot keep these two faces for very long. Their nature will emerge, and reality will sink in. They'll either move that lie from the business life into this family life and community life, which is the case most of the time, or that religious life will have an impact on the business life, which, from what I've experienced in my travels, is unlikely. When that happens, you see that society is rife with such vices. It flows in the bloodstream of people. They lie so easily, and they don't even know that they've lied. That's the worst case scenario, when somebody commits a vice and doesn't even realize that they've committed it. Because then they really don't care about the impact it's going to have on people around them or themselves.
What are your thoughts on the idea that, because when we lie, it's quite clear, and we discussed this earlier, is the idea that you're taking away or you're masking the truth. So truth being a fundamental moral principle, and when you lie, you're taking away that moral reality, that moral truth, that moral principle. You're covering that, you're taking that away, right? But people will often use the term of bending the truth. So you're not necessarily lying, but you're not necessarily giving the whole truth. And I've come across a tradition, and correct me if I'm wrong, this was with one of the imams, where, I'll narrate the story, correct me if I'm wrong, right? So the imam was in the mosque, and an individual rushed into the mosque, and he said, please protect me, hide me, or cover me, some people are after me. So the imam said, okay, hide in this corner, or behind this door, or behind this curtain, for example, and he moved his seat. And when the people came in, and they said, have you seen this person? He said, for as long as I've been sat in this seat, I have not seen this individual. So ultimately that's the truth. He has not seen that individual while he was sat in that position. So he didn't lie. But ultimately that was bending the truth, some may say. And they'll use this, or I've used this ultimately, many times with regards to, for example, even my work life, at home. I know I'm not lying, but I'm not necessarily giving the whole truth. What are your thoughts on that?
This is something known as tawriya. There's somebody, as you said, either bends the truth, or if you were to translate it, it would mean having a double meaning to a sentence or a statement. I've read the anecdote you mentioned, but without any chain of transmission, so let's not accept it as authentic, but it's as an example. If that was the case, then you have to look at in what scenario it can be used. And if you look at and read other books of akhlaq, you find that it's normally used in extreme circumstances, where man is very conscious about not wanting to transgress the boundaries of God. He doesn't want to lie. He knows he has to stay within the boundaries, but there's something very great at stake. Somebody's life, somebody's reputation. If somebody wants to tarnish another person's reputation, and they called and they said that, do you know what this person is? Have you seen him? And his name is Muhammad. You could maybe turn around and say that I haven't seen Muhammad today, meaning a different Muhammad, but not this Muhammad. But you have to weigh it out. When are you going to move yourself to such a grey area and to the final boundaries before you move into a sin? Is it for something on a daily basis that you're just trying to cover up something that you should have done, where you don't want to admit your own fault? Or could it be something much greater, that if somebody's asking in public if you've committed X sin, and you know that protecting your reputation is obligatory, you know that mentioning your sin in public is not permitted, so in that circumstance you might use tawriya or something with a double meaning. But if we use it constantly, it has the same possibility of becoming a habit, and because we're so close to the boundary of lying, sooner or later it's very easy to cross that boundary and end up lying. So why take the risk? That's probably the simplest answer.
And again, the idea that you're ultimately, if you do, forgive the terminology, but if you get caught out with this double truth or this double meaning, and somebody sees or realizes that, hold on, you're bending the truth here, ultimately then you've got that distrust. The idea that you've been, for want of a better word, diplomatic in what you have said, saying one thing meaning something else, trying to bend the truth, shall we say. Again, you're breeding that distrust.
I agree, and hence why I said that somebody may wish to use it in very extreme circumstances. Because if I find out that, for example, you use these double meanings to protect somebody's life to protect somebody's reputation, then I would be in acceptance of that that statement or that act. But if you find that I did it just to protect my own reputation on something very petty, that I didn't want to admit the truth, that's when you might begin to doubt me and lose trust in me. But again, if you look at why I did it, and if I did it for something much greater, you too may accept it, like saving somebody's life or reputation, etc. So I think it can be used. It's clear that it is permissible, but I wouldn't recommend it to be used except in extreme circumstances for this precise reason that you mentioned, and for it to become a habit and eventually possibly leading into a sin.
One of the examples where people may use this, we see, we discuss it, we've discussed it previously at the channel during our lunch breaks, for example, the idea that people will try to, in fact we've had different shows on this as well, the idea of like, specifically in this country, is like tax evasion. So not necessarily, or yes, again, not tax avoidance here, tax evasion. The idea that people will bend the truth, or even lie maybe, to secure maybe some benefit, for example, or to ultimately, pay less tax maybe, for example, and in various different ways as to how people might justify, even if they lie and openly lie. They say, yeah, we lie, but we lie because, for example, this is a non-Muslim country and it's fine. Or the idea that, okay, I earned a certain amount of money, but I will only reveal it in a certain way, or I'll channel it in a certain way, and they're bending the truth, basically. What are your thoughts on this?
I think such a person has not understood the statements, the edicts, the life of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. Firstly, it's clear that we must respect the law of the land. Our religion dictates, and I'm sure other religions dictate too, that the law of the land must be respected and acted upon, unless it's going to hinder the obligations of your own religion. So even if the law of the land stopped us from doing something which is mustahab, I'm certain that the law of the land should be adhered to, because it's something that's mustahab. But if it comes to something wajib, and the law of the land stops Muslims from doing something which is wajib, for example, the headscarf ban that was implemented and put into place in France, something like that, that's when naturally we would want to go against the law. Not maybe openly, but at least protest openly and try and ensure that the ladies, for example, in this example, the ladies will be able to observe the hijab at least within private areas such as the home. So we have to adhere to the law of the land, number one. When it comes to tax, there's nothing which is detrimental in paying tax. It doesn't stop us from, or hinder us from practicing our religion. In actual fact, it's hypocrisy and it's double standards for one not to pay their tax correctly and then expect and demand from the state. Even states that were run by the imams, with their perfect guidance and governorship, you find that there was a tax and welfare system in place, that people had to pay the tax because that was then going to be used for the less fortunate and the deprived. And what about the rest of society and the common requirements that you have? Free education in this country, healthcare in this country. You want the roads to be surfaced regularly. We demand all of this from the state, but on one hand we're demanding it, on the other hand we're not ready to pay the taxes. These are double standards, and this is something that, if acted upon, cannot be done in the name of Islam, because Islam dictates that one must be a law-abiding citizen unless the practice of their religion is becoming prohibited. So I think it's double standards if anyone wants to do this, and categorically it's not permitted in Islam.
Excellent. We're coming towards the end of the show. A final question that I wanted to look at was the idea of taqiyya. This is often looked at in various different ways, and there's always various different discussions based on this topic. When can you use it? Do you use it? Is it something that is specific only to this madhab. Many a time, you will find that people who follow this school are labelled as people that practice this taqiyya, or this dissimulation, if you like. The idea that we'll believe one thing and we'll think one thing privately, but in public we'll say one thing and do something else. What are your thoughts on this? How would you explain this, particularly to someone from outside of this madhab?
Again, taqiyya is used in extreme circumstances. Why would somebody want to hide their faith? Individuals are proud of what they believe in. We're proud of what we believe in. We're proud of the immaculate guides that we have. And we call people to our moral religion. So why would we want to hide it? The only time we'd want to hide it is if there's a greater goal. And there's actual benefit in hiding who I am. The extreme circumstances in which this is normally implemented is to save somebody's life. So if I know I will be persecuted by practicing my faith openly, then I may wish to act upon taqiyya, or I may act in a certain manner in front of people outside, but then I may practice my religion as it's meant to be practiced within the four walls of my house, for example. It's not something that is practiced on a regular basis, neither should it be practiced. At the opposite, we should be promoting our faith and promoting the correct faith, not simply affiliating ourselves to this religion, but acting in accordance with each and every one of its edicts correctly and morally, especially with today's society and environment that we live in, where Islam is being bombarded by all different perverted groups who are trying to use it as its flag in order to try and accomplish their desires. You and I have a greater responsibility than ever before, I feel, to ensure that we uphold the banner of Islam correctly. And so in today's day and age, maybe unless you're in certain pockets of the world which are present, where we as Shia are persecuted for just being Shia, in those circumstances somebody may wish to practice taqiyya. But especially for you and I in the West, alhamdulillah, we're open, and it's easy for us to practice openly and freely our religion. We actually have the opposite duty, to practice it and show its true colors to people.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time out and clarifying some very important discussions. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have left for this week. Join us again next week where we'll look at another topic in the struggle within. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Ahlul Bayt TV, the holy household for every household.